In this video, we're going to continue our discussion of externalities, and we're specifically going to look at what their effects are on the market. Let's start off by looking at a negative externality, because they're a little easier to do. So, I have negative externality. Now, as we talked about before, in a negative externality, the two parties do not have to incur all the costs of their action. So if you recall from earlier, this is where we had two happy people engaged in a transaction, but there was somebody who was paying a cost as a result. Let's talk about pollution, for example. We have a company that may sell a product, and in producing that product, they cause pollution. The people who buy the product and the people who produce the product really don't have to pay the full cost of that pollution. For now, we'll say it's just either, it's dumped into the water supply or it, goes off into the atmosphere. So everybody in the community feels the effects of this pollution, but the buyer and seller in the transaction, remember, do not have to pay the full cost. So what we're saying is that since all these people incur costs because they have lower quality air, lower quality water, they may get sick, they may actually have actual bills, but at the very least, they're going to incur some kind of cost, whether we can really assign a solid monetary value to it or not. All right, let's look at the impact here on the actual market structure. So in our market, we currently have a prevailing price and quantity, but this is going to be based on the demand and the supply, but the supply is just the supply on the private side. So we'll hear that called like the private marginal cost, or the marginal cost versus the buyer and the seller. And what we've basically implied here is that this transaction actually creates these additional costs that we can't capture, so that the real supply curve ought to be here, and this is going to be what we call the marginal social cost, or the private cost plus the externality. And this would be the full cost of producing whatever this good is. So let's say we're producing oil or steel or something like that. We might, a private market would charge P1 and Q1. But if we were to really force these people to pay the full cost of their actions, and they had to account for that in the actual transaction, what you would see then is that there would be a lower supply, and the result in the marketplace would be that there is less of this good produced, which by the way means less pollution, and that those people who bought the good would have to pay the higher price for it because they'd be paying the full cost of their actions. That's just a basic summary of how we would deal with the negative externality. The question, of course, is how to get this supply curve to shift to the left in this way. And in reality, the way we do that is with a tax. Because remember that taxes decrease supply. So if we had a negative externality, such as pollution, how would we handle it? Well, we would tax the people involved in the transaction, and presumably we would use that additional money to do some pollution cleanup or mitigation and so on. So again, just a basic explanation of how a negative externality affects the market and how we tax that behavior to produce less of it.